You already know trauma is a problem in your world and in the world at large, but have you ever stopped to wonder if it's actually making you sick? Not just stressed out, but actually tired, inflamed, in pain, on edge, and disconnected from your own inner world. In this episode, I want to show you how trauma gets into your body, your mind, and your relationships, why that can slowly make you unwell over time, and give you a 5-step process you can start using today to turn a little of that trauma into something more beautiful. Now, this isn't about pretending traumatic experiences are okay or that healing is easy. And it's definitely not about spinning your pain into like toxic positivity. It's about reclaiming a little sovereignty over your own system in a world that is constantly trying to take it from you. My name is Dr. Atlas, and welcome to Alchemy with Atlas, where I help folks transmute their stress and trauma before it makes them sick using systems for self regulation. Let's begin by defining trauma. In a previous video, we talked about stress as pressure to change. Something shifts in your life and it creates pressure for you to change along with it. Well, if stress is pressure to change, then what happens when you can't change along with it? That is called oppression. Pressure, oppression. Oppression is overwhelming pressure. And oppression is where trauma begins. So, if we really want to answer whether trauma is making us sick, we have to start right there because oppression is the overwhelming pressure that causes a trauma response in the first place. And that trauma response is what your system does to survive and get through the overwhelming pressure. Let me show you exactly how that works because once you see the mechanics, everything else in this episode, especially the 5 steps to resolving it, it's going to make a lot more sense. So let's start with the stress response cycle. And this is something I talk a lot about over and over on this channel. When something happens to you, like you get a comment, you open a bill, or you get a diagnosis, or even if it's something lovely, like someone throwing you a birthday party, that's a triggering situation because it triggers your stress response or your body mind relationship system. It moves through a simple loop to actually respond to that change. So, first, you feel. Your body creates a sensation, and that sensation is designed to give you energy to respond. So, it's really important to have that feeling in your body. Then you think. Your mind takes that sensation and builds a story around it and looks at the situation and builds a story around that. So, it helps you make sense of what is happening. Then you act. You send a signal out into your relationships. You say something, you move, you reach out, you pull back. And that signal, whatever it is, makes an impact on the situation. Even if it doesn't change the situation, it might change how you or others feel about it. So there's an impact. Feel, think, act. I call it your feel, think, act flow. And it is the model that underlies everything we talk about on this channel about self-regulation, stress, trauma, and more. When your system is regulated, your ability to feel and to think and to act, really to flow, like that whole process is flexible and adaptive. You feel something, you understand and think about something, you respond to the situation, and the energy in your body, mind, and relationship, it keeps moving. And your whole system ends up settling back down and resets for the next situation. That is what I call an integrated stress response cycle. But as you can imagine, that's not always what happens. Sometimes a situation makes it genuinely unsafe to go through that flow honestly. So sometimes the honest feeling isn't allowed or appropriate. The honest thought isn't safe to say out loud. The honest action would maybe cost you too much or make the situation worse. So your system does something intelligent. It interrupts that loop. It interrupts your flow. It disconnects your body from your mind, from your relationship so that you can get through the moment. And that interruption, that what I call an interrupted stress response cycle, that disconnection that's created is trauma. Trauma is a wound. And that's what I really want you to hear. Trauma is not the event that happens. Trauma is the wound your system experiences or creates when it has to either become shut down or get distorted in order to survive and move through an overwhelming situation. So, oppression is the pressure that makes an honest response unsafe. The trauma response, or like I said, an interrupted stress response cycle, is what your system does to survive that pressure. It interrupts its own feel, think, act flow in a very smart way. And when your system has to do that over and over, that's what can make you sick, physically sick, mentally sick, and relationally sick. So, if we want to understand trauma, we actually have to understand oppression, because oppression is the thing most often forcing that trauma response in the first place. And oppression shows up at all kinds of levels in our lives. There's oppression in relationships, like wherever a power imbalance makes it unsafe to be honest, like with the boss who signs your paycheck, or a partner who you depend on, or a parent or a caregiver who shelters you, or an audience, right? Clients whose approval like pays your bills, right? So the person with more power in that dynamic might not actually mean to be oppressive at all, though sometimes they do. But if you have to constantly suppress your real response just to keep the relationship going, right? Or to stay safe, oppression is present. There's also oppression built into our societal system. So, like the big societal stuff: racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, ageism, economic inequality, religious discrimination, and so much more. These are the kind of forces that require whole groups of people to manage, to soften, and to hide their honest responses just to move through an ordinary day. And it doesn't always announce itself really big or really violently, right? Sometimes it's just never seeing yourself in society, or seeing an aspect of yourself reflected back as normal or worthy or beautiful. And if you're not those things, like being sold 100 products to fix what actually was never broken. So there's societal oppression as well. There's even oppression baked into the technology that we can't opt out of if we want to participate in the modern world. So, those contracts that you have no say in and you have to agree to, the data taken from you without any real consent, your information that is sold without you giving them permission, the terms you have to accept just to hold a job or see a doctor or exist online, like all of those things are technological forms of oppression. They can be overwhelming. Like if you want to participate in modern world, you have to go along with it. Now, oppression can also happen with things that are totally beyond everybody's control, like natural disasters or accidents or atrocities. Those are overwhelming events, right? Overwhelming pressure, oppression, that can ignite that trauma response as well. And then there's the more low grade, everyday kind of oppression that can trigger an interrupted stress response cycle or trauma. So, the child who learns to stop crying, not because their caregiver is terrible or abusive, but because the caregiver themselves is overwhelmed and simply cannot hold one more thing. Or the employee, right, who smiles during a meeting while swallowing the anger of like being undermined or overlooked. Or a person who hides who they are because their community won't accept them. Or the person who stays silent about their needs because every time they've spoken up, they've been told they're too sensitive or overreacting. Oppression, if we really expand the definition in a way that's helpful to understand the trauma response, oppression happens anytime a situation presents you with circumstances that overwhelm your ability to honestly and naturally respond to it. To cope with that, your body-mind relationship system disconnects because it's super smart. So you feel one thing, you think another, and you do yet another. This is a healthy, smart response for a body-mind relationship system because it helps you avoid making the situation worse. It increases your chances of surviving it, and it keeps you connected to significant others, to other people that support your survival. And if you were listening to the examples, you might have noticed that much of the oppression we experience is within social relationships. And it ends up forcing us to choose others over ourselves. Your body mind relationship does that because connection is how humans survive. Many of us don't grow our own food, though shout out to people who do, or generate our own power, or run our own internet cables. Like, we depend on other people for nearly everything that keeps us alive. So your system is wired to protect your relationships and your place within a group, even when that means creating a wound within your own system. So, what actually happens inside you when oppression keeps forcing that trauma response, when it keeps interrupting your feel, think, act flow? Well, when you can't safely feel what you feel, think what you think, and act how you honestly want to act, right? What's going to happen first and foremost is that your body is going to naturally create a response to cope with the triggering situation, but it's going to do it in a way that protects you. So your body is going to disconnect your awareness from the sensation, because that sensation is in your body is like the thing that's propelling you. It's motivating you, right? It's energy in motion. Emotion is meant to motivate you to feel, think, and act on a certain way. So the most efficient response to that is to break the connection between your body and mind and leave your body stranded with that sensation all by itself. So in that case, you go kind of a little numb. Your mind, kind of floats up above your body and you go somewhere else or imagine something else. And you might get through the whole day and realize that I have not taken a full breath in hours. And that disconnect, that's dissociation. And it's a smart, protective move in a situation that you can't safely respond to, where your body-mind relationship system has deemed that sensation unsafe. The most efficient way is to disconnect your body and your mind. So you abandon your body so that your mind can tend to your relationships and your outside world, ultimately to keep you safe. But here's the issue. That energy, that sensation in your body has to be managed. When it can't flow through you and complete the feel, think, act cycle, it's going to get stuck. And the way that your body gets it stuck is it creates tension, right? You want to say something, but then you have to clench your jaw. You want to run away, but you can't. So you pull your shoulders in and round your spine. Or, you want to really yell, but you can't. So your lungs clench up. Or you want to cry and your lungs clench up, right? So that tension serves a purpose because in that moment it stops you. It stops the sensation and it keeps that energy that wants to come out. It creates rigidity there. And when that tension becomes kind of the way you live because you've had to day after day, year after year, that long time held tension and unprocessed like stress response can feed long-term low-grade inflammation, because when you have tension and things rubbing up against each other that shouldn't rub up against each other, the body thinks that that's a wound, because it is. And in a low-grade case, it's going to send inflammation, because inflammation is super smart. Let me break this down. When you get a cut in your skin, you see how it gets like really swollen. What's happening is there's all kinds of things being sent to the wound to help heal it. That inflammation and that swelling is good in the long term. But when you have things that are chronically tense and chronically rubbing up against each other, right, in your body, that is also going to be a wound. And the body's going to be like, we need to send inflammation there. Low-grade, short-term inflammation can be healing. Long-term inflammation, however, is linked to a higher risk of all kinds of diseases and disorders, like heart disease and diabetes as examples. So, yes, oppression and the unresolved trauma response it creates can absolutely make us sick in a very real, very tangible way. When we live inside systems that constantly require us to suppress, distort, or disconnect from our own feel, think, act flow, your body pays for it. the exhaustion, the pain, the brain fog, the I'm always on edge and I don't know why. Like those can be signs that your system is doing its very best to survive real oppression and is in that trauma response for a very long time. So your individual system ends up getting sick because you're forced to live inside a collective system that's sick. And oddly enough, that kind of sickness might be one of the healthiest, most honest responses a body could possibly have. Now, I want to be very clear that this kind of trauma isn't only war zones and headlines or what you would think of as trauma. For most of us, the oppression that activates an interrupted stress response is much quieter than that. It's the small daily ways that we are asked to turn against ourselves, like just to stay connected. So, as a kid, maybe your sadness was too much for a caregiver who was already carrying too much. So, crying started to feel like it might have cost you their love or their protection. So, you learned to swallow it. Or maybe it just stressed them out because they always wanted to fix it. In either case, you learn that that kind of feeling and those kind of thoughts and that kind of action is off limits. At work, speaking up might get you punished. So you learn to smile while being undermined, even as your whole body like wanted to say something. Or in a community where questioning things might get you pushed out, or dressing differently or expressing your gender differently. That might have gotten you pushed out, punished, abused. At that point, you'll learn to keep your questions and your identity to yourself, because losing that community can actually feel like losing everything. And online, the stakes are like super strange. Likes and follows and brand deals, like they can actually be tied to your sense of inclusion or even actual income. So approval, even from strangers, becomes survival in a very literal way. And if you belong to a marginalized group, you are also moving through a world that keeps reflecting that your body, your nationality, your hair, your skin, your size, your gender, or your sex, like it's reflecting that back to you as less than, or as invisible, or as criminal. That's not necessarily always going to be one big trauma, though it can be. That is a steady daily oppression, constantly telling you to manage, soften, hide, and change who you really are. Your system is going to experience all of that as a feel, think, act flow that keeps getting interrupted in little ways all day long. And it ends up being a trauma response, a wound firing again and again. And over time, that leaves your system braced, on alert, and you become disconnected from your body, which ends up getting inflamed and is vulnerable to all that we already talked about. None of this is your fault. It's an intelligent response to an environment that is not safe. But it does mean that if you want to feel more happy, healthy, and whole, you're going to need to find ways to give your system, like to reconnect your system and regain the flexibility, because that's really what a trauma response does. An interrupted stress response creates that wound and creates rigidity. Something gets stuck. So in order to heal that, you need to create flexibility where the rigidity has occurred. So you need small chances to like feel and think and act in alignment, even when your circumstances are unfair. So what can you actually do? How can you possibly feel, think, and act in a world that constantly wants you to do otherwise, especially when you can't change the whole system overnight, even though we want to? I want to walk you now through 5 steps to take when oppression is activating that trauma response. So taking oppressive obstacles, oppressive situations, and turning them into opportunities for healing. Don't think of these steps as a magical formula that's going to make all your oppression better or make the oppression stop. Instead, think of them as 5 steps to give your feel, think, act, flow room to move again and to create more flexibility in your system so that it becomes integrated and whole, even when the world doesn't want you to be. So these 5 steps are used in response to triggering situations. So they're helpful to use when something actually happens to you here in the moment. They're not meant to rehash the past. And actually, when you create more flexibility in the present moment, you automatically repair wounds in your system from the past. So in many ways, that's very good news. You don't have to remember, recall, sit through, or process every traumatic or oppressive moment you've ever had in order to be more happy, healthy, and whole. You just need to respond to moments in the present using an integrated or connected feel, think, act, flow. When you repair that cycle, you release some of that tension, create more flexibility in your system, and that is how you can actually heal. So, this 5-step process will help you do that. It is based on research on stress and trauma, but I'm going to make it very simple and just give you the steps so you can walk away with something practical right now. So, the next time something happens and you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, confused, disoriented, triggered, try these 5 steps out. This episode is sponsored by the Gravity Point Institute, an education and technology company dedicated to helping humanity become more happy, healthy, and whole. The research is very clear. Self-regulation and stress resolution is an integral part of wellness. But self-regulation never had a unified system, one that organizes and operationalizes the process of keeping your entire human system balanced in a way that's repeatable and reliable. Until now, the Gravity Point Institute was founded to build one. At the center of its work is the Gravity Point Paradigm, a framework mapping 20 stress responses across 10 dimensions of the human system, each having its own method for restoration and balance. The complete framework is actually available now in the Gravity Point Anthology, a book series that blends neuroscience, Vedic sciences, and quantum mechanics to help you transmute stress and trauma to heal your world, so together we can heal our world. The link is in the description if you'd like to learn more. The first step is surrender. Release what you can't control. I know this may seem counterintuitive, but hear me out. Surrender isn't about saying that the oppression is okay. And it's not about being complicit or complacent or compliant to systems constantly trying to erase you. That's not what this is about. Surrender is about admitting that in this exact moment, in a particular way, you can't change the circumstances of your situation. You can't change your boss, your government, your family, the algorithm, or the history that got us here. As an advocate, activist, or an average person just trying to survive the slew of systemic oppression in our world, it's very tempting to keep fighting against it right there, right then, in that moment. But that is not how new situations are born. It's actually how old situations are fed. If something is happening and you don't like it and you spend all your time fighting against it, what you're doing is you're fueling that circumstance with your energy. New circumstances, one that are more liberated and loving, come from fighting for something new, not against the way things are. So instead of fighting reality inside your own head or continuing to bang yourself up against a mechanism much, much larger than yourself, surrender first so you can step back and reorient your efforts so they're actually more effective. This step involves naming what's outside of your control, physically moving yourself somewhere else, right? In another room, to the bathroom, going for a walk outside, and letting your body actually feel the grief and disappointment that the situation is not working for you or for the loss of something that it's taking from you. You might put a hand on your chest and say, "This is unfair and I hate that I can't fix it right now." And then you give your body a small break. Drink some water, step outside, feel your feet on the floor, go have a cry, say a prayer, meditate, do an invocation. In this step, you're setting down the belief and the pressure, really, that you have to carry the whole system by yourself, that you have to fix this all by yourself. And this allows your body to stop bracing against something that's impossible. And this is really important because continually bracing, right? Being in that state of constant tension that we discussed actually robs your body of the health and the energy it needs to actually make a difference in the end. So surrender is really important, even though it might feel a little counterintuitive. So that's the first step, surrender. The next step is C. Picture what a loving resolution would look like. Now that you've surrendered what you can't control, you've made a little room. So in this step, you're going to start filling that space, not with action yet, but with vision. So you're going to picture what an ideal situation would actually look like for you, right? You look at your situation, the triggering situation, and you ask yourself, what would turn this into an aspirational situation? Ideally, what would this look like? So you're not spending time on what survival looks like. You already know that one, right? Instead, you're going to ask yourself, what would it look like for things to be more loving, right? For you, for your body, for your mind, and for the people that are involved. Maybe it's being able to tell the truth without being punished for it. Maybe it's leaving the job that's been draining the life out of you. Maybe it's something like being able to rest without guilt gnawing at you the whole time. Now, I know that you might be tempted to dive right into action, but this step is really important. All of them are. When you live under oppression, your system gets very busy, rightfully so, scanning for threat that it forgets there's any other possibility. Your imagination narrows down to just one possibility. And that's really your brain saying, I just want to look at what's bad so that we can take care of this. It's just saying, get through this. In order to really transcend trauma and turn oppression into opportunities, you need to rise above that automatic response. So, when you deliberately picture a loving resolution, you're doing something almost rebellious, like you're reminding your system that something other than survival is possible. You're not promising yourself you're going to get all the way there. You're just letting your body see the destination so it has something to move towards instead of only something to run from. That is how we create new situations. So that's the second step, C. The next step is say. Put it into words. Once you see the ideal situation, or what I call the aspirational situation, the next move is to say it out loud, only in a place that it is safe to. And I know that for a lot of us, this is exactly the part that got shut down in the first place. Like, speaking your truth is often the very thing that oppression punishes you for the most. So start where you actually can. Don't go back to your oppressor. Don't do things that are unsafe, right? Like, there's a difference between being empowered and being reckless. Instead, in this step, you're just whispering it. Maybe you're writing it out in your notes app. You're telling one safe person, or maybe you're sharing your vision with a tree or a plant or a pet that can hold space for you. Maybe you say it to Mother Earth, or just say it inside your own head if that's all that's available right now. But in this step, you are putting words to your vision. So something like, I want to be able to speak up at work without being punished because staying silent is tearing me apart. Or I want to rest tonight instead of answering every message because my body hurts and I matter too, right? So notice that this step is actually rebuilding the loop we talked about earlier, right? So surrender is what clears the energy out of your system, pulls it back, tries to reset. Now we're seeing and saying. So we are feeling and thinking, right? So we're reconnecting that feel, think, act, flow. We're letting the sensation of I'm exhausted connect to a story of this isn't sustainable, and connecting that to a signal, right? So, okay, I'm going to just stay home tonight. That's your feel, think, act, flow, reconnecting right there as you put your voice to the new possibility that you envisioned. Even if you can't act on it fully yet, saying it out loud means that you've stopped gaslighting yourself about what you need, right? You're being honest and being clear, even when you live in a world that's constantly trying to convince you that your needs don't matter, or, you aren't real. Like, refusing to gaslight yourself is a pretty big deal. And at this point, what you can see, again, I'm not telling you all the research behind this, but there's research to these steps. We're creating more flexibility where previously there was rigidity. And part of that is putting voice to the vision that you have. So that's the third step, say. The next step is support. Gather what you need. In this step, you're gathering resources. Support has two types of resource gathering, and we need both. So there's the outside kind and the inside kind. Let's start with the outside kind. These are relational resources. So this is talking to a friend or a therapist. It's finding a community of people who actually get it, who don't need you to explain why the thing and the situation is hard. It's learning your real rights at work or in your housing. So it might not be actually connecting to other people. It might be actually looking for data or gathering up objects, right? So you were never meant to carry any of this life alone, certainly not the difficult parts of it. But when we are being oppressed, isolation is often how the oppression lives on. So, reaching for support is actually an incredibly liberating experience. It's you refusing to be isolated by systems that want to separate you from others. And again, this isn't just about discrimination, although it's very important in discrimination. If you have an accident, or you have a health diagnosis, or if you have an atrocity happen or a natural disaster, like, you are not meant to carry that alone either. Domestic violence, abuse, neglect. Reaching out is also rebellious in those situations too. You are not meant to carry that pressure. That is why it is oppressive. When we come together, we carry more energy together. So that same amount of pressure doesn't feel so overwhelming. So gather your outside resources in this step. And that doesn't have to be a big deal. It could just be like a quick text to somebody or a quick search online. Like, these steps don't have to take a long time, but in some cases they might. Once you gather your outside resources, you also need to gather your inside resources, which sometimes is honestly harder. At this part, you are saying, what aspect of this situation can I own? So many forms of oppression and the trauma that it creates, it forces us to disown ourselves and our ability to influence our own lives. And quite frankly, there will be many situations in your life that feel like you cannot reclaim sovereignty over your self-creation. Still, it is reclaiming whatever sovereignty we do have that often empowers us to get through the most horrific of times. So Viktor Frankl articulated this better than almost anyone. You probably have heard of him. He was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps. So he lost everyone, his wife, his parents, his brother, and he endured about as total and brutal an oppression as a human being can face. And he wrote about what he learned in his book called A Man's Search for Meaning. And I want to be really careful about why I'm bringing him up, because this is easy to hear the wrong way. Frankl was not saying that the camps weren't horrific. He was not saying the right attitude could make oppression okay, or that anyone could simply think your way out of a difficult situation. He couldn't. He never pretended otherwise, and neither should we. Oppression is real, and the only way this world will change is if we all take action to build something better. So the takeaway here is that in order to build something better, we must first find the sovereignty within ourselves to do so. So Frankl wasn't saying that a positive attitude will change the world, but he was saying that even there, after everything else had been stripped away from him, there was one thing that his oppressors could never touch, and that is the freedom to choose what happened inside of him and how he chose to respond, how to feel, how to think, and how to act. That last inner freedom was the only thing they couldn't take, and that matters for you too. If that sliver of sovereignty was real, even in a place like that, in the Nazi concentration camps, then it is real for you too, in your job, your family, your newsfeed, your circumstances. This step is not asking you to pretend the oppression isn't real, and it's also not saying that you can choose your way out of something that's genuinely outside of your control, right? Instead, it's asking you to find that small inner place that's yours, your feelings, your thoughts, and your actions, because reclaiming those things is often exactly what carries people through the very hardest situations. And it gives us all the power to create something new. So the second part of this step is about finding the small piece that's actually within your influence, because that's the piece that you can actually move. So maybe you notice you've been overgiving in a relationship because that's exactly what oppression trained you to do to stay safe, right? Or maybe you've been ignoring your body's signals because going numb has felt safer than feeling it all. Or maybe you've been doom scrolling and perpetuating your stress instead of setting boundaries with your phone. So this step of support is twofold. It's getting that support from outside of you, but also leaning into the supports you already have within you. What can you control? That's the fourth step, support. And now at this point, you have everything you need because you kind of got a plan, right? You know what support you needed from others and objects. And now you have the support you've given yourself to figure out what to do next. So the last step is show up. Take one small intentional action. So here's the last step. And I want to take the pressure off of you right away because this is the one that can feel really overwhelming if you do too much. Showing up does not mean blowing up your entire life in a single afternoon. It does not mean you have to leave your partner or move homes. It doesn't mean quitting the job tomorrow or fixing the whole system at once. And it certainly does not mean confronting your oppressor or the oppression directly, right? Instead, it means taking one honest, safe action from a slightly more regulated place than you were in when the situation began. Maybe that's, sending one clear email instead of like 5 different apologetic ones. Maybe it's saying, I can't make it tonight, sitting with that discomfort of disappointing people and letting yourself rest. Maybe it's unfollowing the accounts that leave you feeling like really small every time you scroll. Or maybe it's finally booking the appointment you've been putting off because some part of you is scared you won't be believed. Maybe it's something as small as doing the dishes or as large as having a difficult conversation. The goal here in this step of showing up is not perfection, and it is not an all-encompassing action. Instead, the goal in this step is completion, and to take the action and make it so small that completion is realistic, achievable, and like I keep saying, safe. I do not want to undermine the fact that real oppression has real threats. That's why your system is shutting down and disrupting itself in the first place. So when you take action, remember, it's not always about fighting against the situation to stop what's happening or confronting your abuser, because that might not be smart and that might not be safe. Instead, it's about rerouting your stress response cycle so that your energy is actually moving more effectively. Remember, the whole problem with the trauma response is that it blocks your feel, think, act, flow. The energy starts to move and then it gets stuck. And if we do that over and over, those places within our system become rigid and we only have that one kind of response for the rest of our life. So when you show up, though, with one intentional action that is different from that rigid response, you're creating more flexibility and allowing that feel, think, act, flow to actually finish. So you feel it, you think about it, and then you do something about it. And the energy moves all the way through your body, mind, relationship system. And every single time you let a loop complete like that, you are teaching your body something it very much needs to know in a very unfair world. We are not completely powerless. There is, in fact, room to move. There is a way to reclaim sovereignty and self-worth and take our energy out of the oppressive situations and invest them in more aspirational situations. That's how real change happens in our individual lives and in the world. Those small completions are how you slowly reclaim that sovereignty and that self-worth. And looping all the way back around about what this episode is about, that also allows the tension and inflammation and rigidity that your body has been carrying to actually settle down. Just a little, situation by situation. And in time, this helps to resolve the underlying dysregulation that ultimately leads to all of those illnesses that we talked about earlier. So those are the 5 steps: surrender, see, say, support, and show up. And here's what I'm hoping that you take away from this lesson. Trauma is not just in your head, obviously. It is the very real way that your system interrupts itself under oppression. And it lives in your body, in your mind, and in your relationships. When you have a trauma response or an interrupted stress response cycle, it disrupts your feel, think, act, flow and pushes you into a state of rigidity. And that constant rigidity and that tension will build up inflammation and can lead to illness. Now, obviously, you didn't choose the system you were born into. You didn't choose to come into this world that's really struggling right now. The trauma you carry is not your fault, and the oppression that's happening is not your fault. And much of what caused it might actually be beyond your control. But at any time, you can start choosing how you move inside of these systems. Every time you surrender what you can't control, you see a more loving possibility, you say what you need, you support yourself with real resources, and you show up one small, safe way at a time, you take back more sovereignty over your own system and you contribute to the world in a more regulated way. Now, if you do want a deeper version of all of this, it exists, including all the stress responses and all the steps. That's what the Gravity Point Anthology is for. So there's a link in the description if you want to dive deeper. And if you want like a steady support in practicing all this, you can join my free newsletter. And we're going to talk about different topics each week aligned with trauma, stress, and really becoming more happy, healthy, and whole, because that's what you deserve. You deserve to be more happy, healthy, and whole, even in a world that doesn't want you to be. So I hope you remember that. Try out the 5 steps and let me know how they go in the comments. And if you want to keep learning, you can watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.